All right. Good evening, friends, amigos y amigas. Welcome again to another interlude in space where we chat, talk, tertuliamos with one another in Tertuliando Cuarentena, gathering in quarantine. It's been now 4 months and counting of this. Sometimes I really can't believe I've been doing this for over 4 months. And it's funny, sometimes I have people coming in, and some of my guests are like, "You've actually been doing this Monday to Friday for all this time." I'm like, yes, yeah. It's cumulatively, it sounds overwhelming, but every day is a new talk and every day is a new conversation, and it really is self therapy. So, for all of you guys watching, this is really self therapy. I started this as a self therapy. It urged to me to need these spaces, and it's turned out to be something really cool and really interesting. So tonight we actually have a first because we're having a two for the price of one kind of deal. We have my friends Bill and Shobha, and they're joining me in. And let's see if I can touch the magic button here and bring him on board. So let's see. Give me a second. All right. Greetings. How are
We're
you guys?
Hello, my friend.
yeah, we're doing well. Doing well.
It's good to have you guys over. Thank you so much for both of you accepting, because one of you could accept it and the other one could have rejected. Be like, no, I'm not going to participate. So thank you for you guys both accepting this invitation. And it's really nice to see you. I haven't seen you guys since late February,
Yeah.
which I'm glad we got to jump into that encounter, because otherwise it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
That's true.
I don't know about you, but that was the last time we were in a restaurant.
Let me calculate. No, it wasn't. When I was in Puerto Rico, I did go to a really nice restaurant too, and that was my last. You guys was the second to last time, but it was really nice food I had there. We had there. So what we do here in this space, we have conversations. We interact with each other, and we basically like to start things off talking about the now, talking about what's been going on for these past 4 months. And you guys have a bit of an interesting story because you guys were finding yourselves moving around a bit when this whole thing started. So can you walk us through what it's been like for you, what you guys were doing when this whole thing broke out, at least in the United States? And you guys can both share what it has been like for you individually, perhaps. And so, question one: what were you guys doing when this whole thing broke out? What has it been like for 4 months of this new circumstance? And feel free to share a little bit about the pandemic times, and how it's been for you guys.
Okay. Well, we have a small RV, and normally in the winter we travel, and we left our home in Greenbelt, Maryland in mid November. And we traveled out west, and we had a wonderful time. We ended up in Florida, and when the pandemic was just starting, we were in Key West with family, and then in Miami with some very dear friends. And we realized that, oh boy, this is looking serious.
Hmm.
And we, yeah, every day watching the news and trying to figure out, are we going to be stuck here in Florida? We're not going to be able to go home, or what should we do? And so we decided that it would be best if we were in our own home, since it looks like everything was shutting down and all the restaurants were closed. And it even started to be that people driving into Florida were being stopped and interviewed to figure out where they came from. So we thought we better just head home. And we did. And because we have a little RV, we didn't have to get out of the car except for just to get gas.
Hmm.
And because we have our own little bathroom, our kitchen, everything is there. So yeah, so that we've been home then since the first week of April, or very early April is when we first got back here to Maryland.
Yeah.
You want to add something?
Yeah. I think that about covers it. This is the third year that we've done this. We like to go to warm weather. We like to have
Hmm.
adventures out there, be in beautiful places. We have hooked up with a group of people I guess it was not this last
2
year,
years ago.
2 years ago, and we're still in touch with them. We have a Facebook page group, and
It's a nomadic community that we joined.
Right.
It's called Music and Mind Camp.
right. And about half of them are full time. The other half, like us, we're out for months at a time, and then we come back. And so we spend a couple of months with them, and then work our way back. And that's we typically that's what we do. We hang out with these folks for a couple of months in the southern Arizona, southern California, and then in the desert, and it's warm there. And then we head back, and we have a number of little friends along the way. And we ran into you while we were visiting friends in Houston, and had that dinner together. That was great. And then, like Shobha said, Florida, we have a number of friends in Florida, and then we skipped a bunch then coming home because we just made a beeline for here. Yeah.
Had to kind of like accelerate that return back home.
Yeah, we just had to wait as we drove by our friends and family that we would have liked to have seen.
Yeah.
But we just felt like it was best to get home.
And we've been pretty much in the house since then. I mean, we get out, we take walks, and we've gone a few places, but we're pretty careful. It was pretty bad here for a while. It's better now, but Maryland had its issues, and our county, Prince George, is we're just outside of D.C. If anybody out there doesn't know, and our county was hit the hardest of those in Maryland. So we've been kind of what's it called, isolating, quarantine.
Yeah, self quarantine. Yeah, that's a part of our everyday vocabulary now.
Yeah. We never even used that term before.
Yeah, only in movies.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We are in that movie right now.
Yeah.
Another thing I like to get some feedback from my guests is kind of hearing stories. I love hearing stories. I love navigating all the visuals and all the imaginarium that takes place when a person shares a story, and also a great way of learning. And I ask, and in this particular case is too. So you guys can share individually. You guys can share stories as you guys have journeyed together in life. And the question is at least three incidents, stories, anecdotes, or moments that you guys can reference as though they've been of transformation for you, as of maybe not in the moment, maybe not acknowledged in the moment, but later on you look back and you're like, yeah, that thing definitely triggered these other things, and it was conducive to that. At least three instances. I mean, you guys have been together. How long? Well, how long? Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's start with that. How long have you guys been together? As not married, but as in like maybe first point of contact, and then.
Mm-hmm.
So we met in June of 1972. And it was just kind of a little bit of a chance meeting. I was invited to a party with a bunch of friends, and I went with them, and Bill was invited by some other friends, and we just happened to meet that evening at this party. And we hit it off, and we've been inseparable ever since.
You're making me do the math in my head. 1972.
48 years.
48 years ago.
See. It's almost 5 decades. And I don't mean to make it sound like heavier than it is, because when you throw in that word decade, it just sounds heavier than. But 5 decades together, near, and in that framing of time, can you make memory of instances of moments where you saw them as definitely significant enough to particularly maybe remember now, like, I remember this time, or I remember this year that we went through this, or in that sort of line of.
Yeah, well, just to flesh that story out just a little bit and just take it forward just a little bit, was that we did meet, and we went out for a few years, and then we got married in 1975, and we struck out on our own, and You know, the memorable thing for me of that was just meeting Shobha. It was an incredible time to meet her, and we hit it off really, really well right away. And I was sure to try to follow up on that. And
I have to tell you what you said.
Yes, please.
Okay, so the night that we met, Bill, you know, you meet a guy at a party, it's not a big deal, but for Bill, it was a big deal. And so he wanted to take me out. So he says to me, Shobha, I'd really like to take you out, but I don't have any money. And so that was kind of his pickup line, that he didn't have any money, but he wanted to take me out.
He needed to make that disclaimer. Just the expectation level
I had the
would be monitored.
Right. Yeah.
But here we are, 48 years later.
Here we
Almost 50
are.
years
That's
later.
right.
I don't know if that can be turned into a formula, but it definitely it worked.
I would recommend it.
So within the framing of those 48 years, I mean, you guys have kids, have grandkids. I mean, it's been the fulfillment of that, of a loving relationship, you know, spreading its wings and its beautiful harvest. Like, you know, within that framing of time, I'm sure there's been a number of experiences. And I think the dilemma might be how to pick which one to share. But in that timing, you know, like what would you think were moments perhaps where you as a couple, you know, endured moments or went through moments that were rather iconic, rather significant, rather particular, that you might be able to recognize of, you know, this definitely was something, or this or that other people might be able to benefit from, or just great anecdotes to share.
Yeah.
Yeah, do they have to be in chronological order?
No. There's no rules here. They can be zigzagging everywhere, like life.
Okay. Well, one of the things that happened in 2000 is that Bill was in a very serious pedestrian accident. And it's amazing that he's alive because he was dragged by a truck.
Oh,
and when
wow.
he came to, his head was right next to the wheels of this truck. And the truck had to back off of his clothes, which were all in shreds, so that he could, you know, they could get him out from there. And so that was a big deal. That was huge for us. And I took care of him for months and while he recovered. And then about 6 months or 8 months later.
That was in June of 2000. And then in January of 2001.
I was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Oh, wow.
And so then that next year, he took care of me.
Yep.
So, those were some big things that had happened to us in 2000 and 2001.
Yeah. And at that time, you already had kids, no?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yes, our kids were young adults
Mm-hmm.
in college at that time and working. And so, yeah.
What did that do to them? I mean, as much as you can remember, you know, what was that kind of relationship like back and forth during that time that you might be able to remember or share in both incidents?
Well, when I had my accident, you know, we had our boys were, they were both out of high school at that point in 2000. And it had been kind of a rough going through high school time and everything. And there were bumps. But when I had my accident, that we all came together and it really healed a great deal. That was a real blessing actually, in that capacity. And they were very supportive and did a lot for us when Shobha had her cancer, which went on for 10 months before it's all over. And then she had to recover, and that actually took probably years. And so, but now they are both married. They have They have beautiful families of their own. They're doing great. They each have 2 sons. We had 2 sons. They have 2 sons. We don't do girls for some reason. And they're all teenagers now, and they're doing great. We're real happy with them.
You know, going back in that spirit of zigzagging,
Sure.
I use it I use it quite willfully. When you guys, you guys met, and you guys, Bill, you're white, and Shobha, you were born in India, no?
Yes.
Did that have any sort of impact in regards to how your both of your in-laws were were appreciating this new relationship that was brewing up? What was that like for your parents, Shobha, and what was that like for your parents, Bill? If you guys would like to share those episodes.
Well, appreciating is not the word. Nobody appreciated it at all. Uh, yeah, that nobody was very happy about it, because in Indian culture, normally, and what my parents had thought would happen is when I finished college, that they would get my marriage arranged, and they would choose somebody for me and that type of thing. Well, unfortunately, I already chose somebody, and so unfortunately for them, and so no, they weren't very happy about it.
Yeah.
And then on Bill's side, they weren't very happy about it, because I am not what they had envisioned as their daughter-in-law to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so they weren't happy either. So we had it from both sides, that nobody really wanted us to get married. And so, but we stuck it out. I remember talking to Bill's father. We sat down, and he says, but you all are from such different cultures. How can you, what is your life going to be like? How are you going to get along? What's going to happen when you have a family? What will it be like? And, I didn't know the answers to all of that. I was 21 at the time, so I didn't know how to, what to say to this man, Bill's father. But one thing I did say is that, we really love each other. We've been together, and are we to throw all that away just because our cultures are different?
Mm-hmm.
And between the two of us, we didn't have an issue being of different culture.
Well, yeah. When we threw me off.
Did you have, like Bill, for example, did you have any sort of particular memories of it being significantly a hardship for how you were relating with your in-laws? I don't know if there was any particularity between your mom or your dad, Shobha, that probably made it a little bit more challenging for that.
My mom actually, the time we had Bill over for dinner, my mom actually liked Bill, and she was kind of the softening factor for my father. But my father was like, oh no, this can't happen. Oh no. And so his rule was that we could only see each other at church. Like, we couldn't date, we couldn't go out, we couldn't be together outside of church. So we were the best little churchgoers ever.
Yep.
We went Sunday morning, Sunday night, Tuesday night, Friday night, if they had something special, we were there.
Yeah.
Hey man, that makes a whole lot of sense.
So we did that for a whole year.
Yeah. Her father was a pastor. He had come to this country actually to go to Bible college and then to seminary. And he was planning to go back to India, and then something happened, and he wound up not going back, and he went to work on college campuses working with international students. And by the time I knew him, he was really pastoring. Well, they helped an awful lot of people who had immigrated from India to get settled here in this country, and to figure out how to negotiate what to do in this country. And he did a lot of really, really good work with that. One of the things, this is the mid 70s, and we, as an interethnic couple, we did it before it was common. before it was popular, you might say. And
Yeah,
so,
we were
and
one
he
of
was
the
a little
first.
concerned that some of the people he was with might not appreciate that because they were concerned about their daughters marrying Americans and vice versa. So it was still a time which is not as common now as it used to be, where, particularly in America, where it still happens, where children in Indian families, they have arranged marriages, but it doesn't happen so much either in India or here as much as it did. It still does though. And then there was something else I wanted to tell you. Oh, I just want to say that not only was it not difficult to be married to Shobha and in this cross-cultural relationship all these years, it has been wonderful. It has been such a treat to know so many Indians, to know so many people in her family, a lot of which are here, and then certainly their friends. And we've always done very well with them, and they've always been very good to us. We have wonderful friends, and that, I know the food, I know the customs some, I know it's just been a wonderful time. We went to India 3 years ago. 3 years ago.
2017.
Yeah, it'll be 17, right? And we were there for a month, and it's the first time we had gotten to go together. And Shobha had been back when she was a teenager. She came as a very young child, and she went back as a teenager. And it's just a marvelous, amazing culture. Just everything about it. I mean, it's got its issues certainly, but it's got some. It's just an amazing ancient culture that they had there, and we really had a great time doing that. So I've been blessed really by the opportunity to have this life with this beautiful, wonderful woman, and just to do stuff that a lot of white guys don't get to do. Meet people, get to know people so cross-cultural.
You were so young when you came. I'm sure, but you were so young when your family moved. And like, as you mentioned, Bill, it wasn't. Was it intended on being a permanent move, or was it meant to be a?
No, my father had planned to go back to India after he finished seminary. That was the plan. But then the ministry that he was going to be a part of, it fell apart. So then he ended up staying here.
Yeah.
When your family moved here, where did they move to? What state were they?
Well, my father first came when I was a very small baby, and he went to Alberta, Canada, to a Bible school there.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to a seminary in Chicago. And that's when my mom and I came. And I was not quite 3 years old when I first came. So I never really knew my father as a child.
Mm-hmm.
Until I came here, and they were telling me that this is your father, and I'm like, no, my father's a picture on the wall. I don't know who that is.
Wow, yeah.
So yeah, that was a big adjustment for a 3-year-old, and a very bratty, apparently, a 3-year-old. So
Do you have
spoiled?
Do you have? I mean, I have scarce memories of when I was pre-6, 5. Do you have memories of being in India and then crossing over the big pond?
Well, a little bit, but I don't know sometimes if it's actual memories or stories that I've heard, because apparently when I was coming and they wanted me to get onto a black plane, and I saw a red plane, and I had a fit because I didn't want to go on that black plane. I wanted to go on the red plane. And so I don't think I remember that, but I've been told that story many times. And apparently that day I was pitching a fit, and the stewardess picked me up and carried me up the steps.
Oh,
I used to go on the tarmac and you have to go.
yeah, it's completely different times.
Full with bags and everything, and I was having a fit, so they just dragged me onto the plane.
And the reason I ask you this question is to maybe get your feedback as to but given that you're so young, and that's why I asked if you have any memory of maybe that transition of normalcy back when you were a young girl coming over to this new country, And but in the spirit of maybe of things that you might actually remember, did your family, in that, coming as an immigrant, and still in that spirit of maintaining that sacred zeal for your culture alive, was that something that you experienced in your household, like, like the uh, that contrast perhaps maybe between going to school and coming back home? Was there that contrast of maybe speaking a foreign language still at home? Was there some of that? I know that English was definitely a colonized language in India, but I am so ignorant in terms of the, any resistance to that colonial language. I don't know. So was there any cultural efforts in the household? Like, for example, here with my niece and my nephew, I'm like, hey, no, we speak Spanish at home. Da, da, da. Was there a sense of that, of you in your growing up here in the U.S. at home?
Okay, well, when I first came here, of course, I didn't speak any English, and my mom was taught in English in India, so she knew some English, but it's different to be taught it in school than to actually speak it.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to learn English when we got here, and I don't ever remember not being able to speak English well, not being able to talk with my classmates and that type of thing. But when I went to kindergarten, the teachers at school told my parents to only speak English at home. No, do not speak your native language. Only speak English. Because at that time there weren't that many foreign students, so they didn't understand that children can switch back and forth. In fact, I spoke 2 Indian languages when I first came to the US, and I knew that one language we speak at home and the other language we speak with neighbors, and I could switch back and forth. But the teachers here didn't understand that. So, my parents were very dutiful, and the teacher said we should do this. So they did. They stopped speaking to me, in our native language. And so it's unfortunate that even though now I can understand it, I really can't speak it anymore because I lost that ability through the years. They would speak to each other, so I would hear it. But when they turn around and speak to me, they would only speak English. So it's kind of sad. I don't think teachers do that now, but that's kind of how it was.
I think there's an awareness of that that kids can definitely go back and forth. I mean, I have a Puerto Rican friend who's living in France, and her kid is 6 years old, and he's navigating 4 languages.
Sure.
So, and they can do that. You just have to be quite disciplined in how you approach it. Every person has a particular language maybe that they speak to the child, but it is very possible. Speaking about migrations, and I'm interested in the term, spiritual migration, and ever since you guys have been together, has I guess question one, has spirituality been a central part? I mean, intentional spirituality, not the unconscious, because I guess we're all spiritual, but intentional spirituality, that which you're aware of, has it been something of significance in your relationship?
Oh yeah,
Definitely.
well, we already mentioned that Shobha's father came here to go to seminary, and so she grew up in that home. And and I grew up in a church when I was a kid and everything, but I pretty much left that by the time I went to college. And so it was, but then years later, 1974, was when I really had my Jesus moment. And there was a lot going on, with us and with, we wanted to get married, but we weren't quite sure how that was going to work out or how that could work out. And then we had other things going on. I was still not very, I didn't have a lot of money. And so there was just a lot of things that were just not working well. And besides, it was the 70s was a real downer in a lot of ways because I'm a product of the 60s. And in the 60s, as it went along, many of us got the idea that we were going to change the world, that things were going to be different. And by the early 70s, we realized, no, probably not. And that was very depressing. And so anyway, finally, I became a Christian in 1974. We got married in 1975. And I threw myself into that, and in part because that's when we could see each other, that 1 year between when we said we wanted to get married and we actually did get married. And by the way, I want to say that after we got married, her father and I became really good friends. We did very well together, and he apologized to me actually for being so rough with me, and it was fine. I understood where he was coming from. My family also accepted Shobha very well, and so we really didn't have any problems with our families after we got married. Then we went along, and then I took a job. I was working in construction. I had a business degree. This is another thing. I had a business degree, but I didn't want to do that. So I became a carpenter. And so I did construction for a couple of 3 years there. And then when I wanted to get married, I said, well, maybe I need to get a little more serious about this stuff. So I managed to get into an entry-level management position, and I worked with that for a while. And then by the late 70s, and there was, in the construction world, particularly at the lower levels, it's not a very steady thing. You can get feast or famine. But anyway, I went to work for a ministry here in Washington, D.C. The Church of the Savior was the church. And one of their ministries was a housing ministry. It was called Jubilee Housing. And they had acquired several rather old, early 1900s, 19 teens, I think, apartment buildings that needed renovation. And they found they got some grant money to do that. And anyway, I got hired to be like the project manager or superintendent for this thing. And that was a 2.5 year gig. And up until that time, my concept of Christianity was sort of, like I said, I was a product of the 60s, but when I became a Christian, I said, well, let me just set all this away because it hasn't seemed to be working for me. So let me see what's going on here. Mm-hmm. And I just threw myself into the theology and into the understanding. And it was good. It was like my Bible education. And then when I met these people with Jubilee Housing, they were cut from the same cloth as the 1960s. And I said, oh, you mean you can do this kind of thing and be a Christian? This is great. So that was a real turning point for me. And we were there. I was there for these couple of years. Both of our sons were born during that time, one when I started and one just before I left. And right after that, we helped us start a church. And that was exciting for the 80s. I'll tell you, that was one of the most exciting times in our life.
Before you get to that part, I want to ask, and you kind of touched a little bit on that. I want to get a perspective of what was both of you's your school of reference in terms of spirituality. Where were you in that moment? And you're talking about, I guess you hinted a little bit with the company you started working with, and I guess that was also affecting you in your perspective, theologically speaking, perhaps, like you're kind of going back to the 60s and realizing that you don't have to maybe throw out the baby with the bathwater, or kind of like, and still kind of embrace some of these things that maybe were left behind. And what was we're talking about 70s. It was a different climate in the U.S. as I imagine reading. I wasn't there. As far as evangelicalism, it's not what it is now. But there were resounding voices, the concept of televangelism wasn't what it is now. It wasn't really real back then, as it is now. But what voices were you hearing? What thoughts were you navigating in terms of Christianity? How did Christianity look for you? Was it like, how was it cut?
Okay, so when we
prior to starting that church.
yes, okay, so the church that we went to when we were dating, or we weren't even dating, we were just going to church to see each other.
I like the clarification.
I was very interested in what they were having to say too.
No, but we learned a lot. It was it was quite a literal Bible church, and they took the Bible very literally. And like Bill said earlier, it was kind of our Bible education. We learned a lot, and the people were very kind to us. And they, you know, we were this little darling couple that showed up at everything, and they embraced us and just couldn't have been nicer to us. In 1978, we went to a conference, a youth specialties conference. We were youth group leaders at that time. And we went to this conference that opened our eyes to a whole nother world. A world.
This is Mike Yaconelli's thing, right?
Yaconelli, exactly. Exactly. And so when we went to that, it was like, oh my goodness, you can be for social justice. You can understand the Bible in a little different way than we have been taught. And so that was a turning point for us. When we found that out and we started getting Sojourners magazine, and back then they had a magazine called the Wittenberg Door.
Yeah.
That was
yeah. And so that, I think, was our turning point in realizing that there's a whole nother part to Christianity. And one of the songs that we learned there, something about where would Jesus be in all of this? Where would he be? Well, he'd be in the bar with the people that are in a bar, and he would be talking to them. And it was like a whole different concept to us. And it opened our eyes to a whole nother world. And we kind of brought that into the starting of the church that we helped to start. And so and we wanted that to be an open place, an inclusive place, a welcoming place, not you're in or out kind of thing.
So the year is when
1978 we went to that youth specialties.
And when did you start flirting with this idea of like making a new congregation, a new church?
That was not until 82. Yeah, 1982.
And where did that idea spurt out of? Just you guys were conversing and or a group of people?
The church that we went to, Brian McLaren and his family and my family all went to that same church. That's how we met Brian. We were in young adult Sunday school class together, and we hit it off and got to be really good friends with Brian. Brian left that church that we were going to before us. We stayed a bit longer than him, and he started his own ministry. And then at some point he called Bill, I think. Yeah. He called Bill and said, would you be interested in helping me to start a new church or a new community? And so that's how we ended up doing that. So Brian and Grace, they had one child, and we had two children, little bitties. They were all very young, under 3 years old. All the kids were under 3 years old. And that's when we started. We called it at that time Community Church, and later it became Cedar Ridge Community Church, and we still go there now.
38 years later.
How did, when Brian contacted you, Bill, how did he sell you the idea? What was it that he was communicating to you, as if you remember, as that which he feels he needs to make it this new place? What was the objective, the mission statement, or whatever in that informal conversation? What was that like?
Well, Brian in high school had taken a small little Bible study group, after school Bible study group, from about 10 people to like 80 or 100 people.
Hmm.
and he was organizing retreats and all sorts of things. And then when that whole group graduated, they tried to form a church, but the moral of that story is it's hard to start a church with a bunch of teenagers and young adults. He had some ups and downs with that, and he told me later what he told Grace that I think and Brian and I used to get together every once in a while, even after he left, to get together at these picnics that they would have and so on, and we always had wonderful talks and really got off great. And so he said to Grace, Grace, if I'm gonna call Bill Duncan and see if he'll help me start a church, because I think if he'll help me do this, we can do it. Which was a real, that was an honor. And so he called me and he hit me right at the right time, because we were because ultimately we were on our own and we were ready to do this. And so yes, that would be great. And wasn't long after that. So we got together, of course, and talked about it. And gee whiz, we started in April. I think it was Palm Sunday or something in April 1982, and we had talked just a few weeks before that. And I had to grow into it. And like I say, it was one of the most rewarding and difficult and challenging times of our lives, because we had small children. They had small children. They went on to have 3 more children, but we it was all like it started in his living room and progressed from there. And we were sort of a sanctuary for people that were struggling. And it was, sort of the end of the Jesus movement and a whole bunch of things. And people were confused, and they didn't fit here and they didn't fit there, and they came to us and they fit.
Did he have a conversation with you as to what he did not want to do? Like as to what there's so many churches, there's so many things. I mean, there's definitely not lacking of churches in the United States. So what was it that he, and also that he felt like you guys were keen on that, on the fact that he asked you. I'm sure he was hoping a yes. So there was definitely there had to be some perceptive commonality between you guys' vision. So what was it that he wanted to do different from other churches? Was that explicit? Like, did he say it? Like, did he? I want to do this way. This is the vision I have. What was? And not, maybe not in that conversation, but maybe as the steps went one after the other, things started kind of.
I think that we had a very different tone, because it was very folksy, and but the guiding one of the main things was that we wanted to be authentic. We wanted to be very true to what we believed, but we also wanted to be very, very inclusive, which is a little different than some people. So we were very open, and I felt like there were people coming to us who were having problems where they were, and they came into our church, and sometimes it worked out, and sometimes they had problems with us too. But it was a time of healing for a lot of people. It was amazing years, especially in the beginning. The first 3 or 4 years were just very, very busy. It was like I had a very serious part-time job in addition to my full-time job. And Brian too was working for the first few years, and then he was able to go full-time, half-time, and then full-time. And about that time, I got a job that I really wanted to keep, and so I never did shift into ever going full-time into it, but continued to be in leadership there for overall that 15 years before I took a break, stepped down in 1997.
As the church progressed and as time elapsed, what are some highlights that you remember, perhaps of looking back? Let's say this is in the 80s. Fast forward to now. What are some moments that you both recognize were significant? It's kind of like imagining perhaps a timeline, and maybe we can put different asterisks on different moments, and I would imagine that they would maybe coincide with certain intersections in our history with things that were going on in our society. Were there moments that were significant in the history, in the timeline history of this church that you guys can remember that maybe set like an outburst of new people coming in or an outburst of many people going out? Were there memories perhaps in the last 3 decades that you guys can remember and point to and share?
I think that we're going back a lot of years, and I'm sure that there are certain points there, but the overriding memory that I have as probably the highest value is that this was a very, very relational place. This is a place where you made friends, where you were in each other's lives in very real and authentic ways. I mean, it wasn't communal, but we all lived fairly close together, and we did a lot of things together. And we were small. I think that we, until into the 90s, we were still, under 100 people. And for a lot of that time, we were around 60 to 80 or so people. And you can know pretty much everybody in a church that size. But when we got a little bigger later, it was a little more difficult. So that early days was very relational. And
no building in the early days. It was like
in fact, we rented elementary school and a high school and a college back to a high school. And we had purchased a piece of property finally out here a little bit beyond where we are in an area called Burtonsville, and developed that church, and opened in 1999, I think. So we've only been in that building 20 years.
And that's around the time that Brian became a bit of a, like a known.
Writing in the late 90s, but his real breakthrough book was, I think, around 2001. He wrote called New Kind of Christmas. New Kind of Christmas.
Yeah, as like a series.
Yeah, the first of the series. And that struck such a chord with a lot of young pastors in particular, because it asked a lot of questions. And these people had those questions, and they couldn't believe that somebody else could articulate those questions so well. And Brian, one of his biggest skills is he's a communicator. You know that. I mean, he both writes enormously well and he speaks enormously well. He really so he was very, very articulate about that, and people, they were like so thirsty for that stuff. It was amazing. So that really set him off. And then from 2001, he became in demand to go for speaking and this and that, wrote more books. And then in 2005, we decided that he decided, and we all knew this was the right thing to do, that it was time for him to go on and do that, and it was time for us to find another lead pastor, which we did. Matthew Dyer, we found him. He's English, and he had some experience there. And it was at a time where we were moving, and I really was happy to find Matthew, because my concern was that we were in change, and we needed somebody who knew who we were, could figure out who we were, could help us to get to where we were going. We didn't have time for like on-the-job training, which a lot of young people, a lot of young pastors were very interested in this, because it was Brian McLaren's church, and by that time he was pretty famous. And so he's still there, very dear friend, Matthew, and we're doing very well.
Do you, stories of evolution I find great interest in. In the time that Brian was there up till when he left, were there moments where, because, as a pastor, I guess ideally you're communicating to your brethren and your sister, then you're communicating with your congregation, things that you're going through, things that are happening. Were there moments where he stepped out in terms of something and some issue that you could remember that was maybe, like received with, or just something tough to talk about or position, like, I don't know, about that point, the whole LGBT thing had already, I think it happened later on after he wasn't pastoring per
beginning.
se.
It was beginning
It
though
was
at
beginning
that
there.
time.
We had conversations about that there then.
So how were those, how were those talked about? You're talking about early 2000s, or maybe even before that. What did that look like? As a communicator, also you as part of it. How did that conversation of maybe the tougher topics look like in that community that was built? That wasn't just accidental. It was built. What were the pros and the cons? And I say within quotes of maybe, like, how was it received? Did people leave? Did people stay? Like, within, and maybe using the example of the LGBT issue, or
Well,
Well-
that wasn't the key issue at the
Well,
time. But
first of all, when I'm a nurse, and in the early '80s, when HIV/AIDS was just starting, I worked at GW Hospital, George Washington University Hospital,
Mhm.
and we, on the floor, the unit that I worked on, there were a number of AIDS patients. That's what we called them back then, and I took care of many, 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 many young men, few women, but mostly men. And they were all around my age. I was in my early 30s at that point. And it was when we had no medicine. There was nothing much people could do. And so people would, you see them over and over again, but they would have 2 or 3 hospitalizations and then they died. And so it was so tragic to see this over and over and over again. But it made me realize that, my goodness, these are human beings that many of their families have deserted them, and they didn't have visitors. Nobody wanted to be around them. And so it opened my eyes to a whole nother world that I wasn't a part of, but I became a part of because of working in a hospital where I was exposed to, these wonderful people who were suffering terribly. And so I didn't learn from my family or really even church anything about being anti-gay or no one ever, but it was just never even talked about. Nobody said anything. And so, but because of my experience of working as a nurse, I became a big advocate for gay rights, for people that are in those situations that I saw so tragically. And as time went on, of course, we got better meds and people got well. And now, it's a totally different situation. People can live a long time and, it's much more under control. But I saw, the devastation in the gay community from HIV/AIDS. And so when at our church, now, some people were not happy that when we made the decision or the statement to be an open and inclusive church.
When was this, if you remember?
When do you
Happened to
think that
Matthew,
was?
actually.
Yeah, this is after Brian, really. It was when Matthew came. And so we had conversations. We had some forums at church where people who our gay community stood up in front and had a panel and answered questions. And it was really that was in 2010, actually, when we had that forum. And so we did lose people because of it, because some people couldn't reconcile that with their faith. They just weren't able to put the two together. They just, some of us are able to do that and, realize that God's love is for everyone and it's not right to exclude people.
Was there significant numeric loss of membership that can be recognized?
Yes. Well, part of the issue was that we had some parachurch people, like people that were employed by some of the college ministries. And in those ministries, I believe that they have to sign a statement of faith, and they weren't able to continue attending a church that was accepting. And
Wow.
so, yeah, so we did lose people because of that. So I don't know if they personally felt that way or because of their ministry. I don't know for sure. But yeah, we did lose people.
And I guess also that relationship with those entities, I guess, that were partnering with the church, that were
We were actually
sending
part.
those volunteers.
They attended our church, and we were supporting some in some
Ah,
way.
okay.
And
Mhm.
and yeah, that was a transitional time. I mean, around 2000, it was just an emerging issue. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
by 2000 and I don't know, mid 2000s, it became a very serious issue. And then we were able to host this thing. That was one of the most amazing nights of my life, actually, was listening to the stories of some people that we knew very well that were part of our community, just telling how they had worked with it. People that had been Christians all their lives and that struggled with it and tried to, change and like that, and just very articulately explain just what a miserable thing that was. And they're still friends of ours now.
I think of, and I want to interject with this. And I was thinking about this before the Tertuliando. I was thinking about what my experience, because I knew I was going to be talking about, church planting and engaging in church and creating church community, especially that contrasts with mainstream church narrative, church community. And I was thinking about my church experience, with the good, the bad, and I was thinking something that resonated in my memory that I really felt very uncomfortable by was the sensation that I started feeling when I started asking the quote unquote wrong questions.
Yeah.
The sensation I felt that it was that no longer you're you're no longer in a conflict free zone. You have now, it's almost like you stuck your finger in the anthill and they're all coming out for you, or they're all coming, it's all a big mess. And I was trying to relive those feelings of inadequacy that I felt, because either the feedback I received was condescendence, or the feedback I received was, like I said, you're asking the wrong questions. And then it was like community didn't exist anymore. I could still congregate, but it was different from that point on. I experienced a little bit of that in my last year working at a school. After a certain point, it's like there's a conflict free zone. Fine, it's fine and dandy. And you experience this great partnership, and then it's like this, it's almost idyllic. It's almost like the effervescence spirit of an ideal suburbia. Like it's just perfect. And then all of a sudden, you notice that it's not perfect. And then questions come up. And then it's like the shit hits the fan. So I that that resonated within me to later on in life, to want to make a space that would not be the experience people had. And the question I have for you is, there is a stigma, and there's a conception we have of older people, of like when you grow older you go more conservative, or you're never going to change. And that responds to a statistic, of course. It's harder, like I remember my grandpa, he was like full on very on the pro statehood party in Puerto Rico, and I don't think he would have ever changed. So it's like, in your experience, how do you allow how do you allow for a space where people can problematize you, where people can put things to question, where you allow that space to happen, that people can challenge you, and place you in a place of discomfort. How do you create that? Because it's almost sometimes we can get like, I'm pro gay, pro this, but what about when that new thing comes and you're like, oh, that's where they draw the line or whatever. Where it would allocate some social issue that really deserves attention. The point is, in summary, in essence, how do you keep that spirit of openness going on? And speaking about a church community, how do you allow that to be a continuous space of openness? What are the ingredients for that to occur?
I can think of two enduring values over 38 years that have been a part of Cedar Ridge. One is that we set ourselves up initially as being an inclusive community, not inclusive sort of in this, in terms of gay folks, not thinking about it at the time, but inclusive in terms of whatever, inclusive of theologies, inclusive of backgrounds, and people, a lot of things in their backgrounds that they're doing. But we never turned anybody away. People self-select when they're there, if this is a place for them or not. When we, in the 2000s, when Brian was there and he began to write books, what I said, he was a communicator. What he was able to do, we had at that time in our community a very broad range of theological thought, of social orientation, political orientation, whatever. A very, very broad thing there. And Brian, communicator that he was, could give a sermon, and everybody thought that he was talking right to them. And he didn't try to push that button too far. He was going at a certain pace. And now when he left and when Matthew came in, Matthew was new. He came in and we had been on this path. And so he started to, we went through, and this was a very, very intelligent thing to do that I would suggest that every new pastor of a church, especially a church that they follow on to a person like Brian or any kind of, very popular pastor, to take the time. We took a full year. And the one thing that we focused on that year was reimagining who we wanted to be. We'd already been there for 20 some years, and we wanted to reimagine what we were going to do in the next 20 years. And as we did that, there were things there that people didn't agree with, one thing or another. And so people were leaving, and not just because of what we've been talking about, but just for any number of reasons. Mm-hmm. But for a lot of people, I mean, it was a challenge for, it was more of a challenge for people whether they wanted to stay with us than we saying we didn't want you to stay with us. So I don't think we had too many lines that, that would say, oh no, I'm sorry, you have to leave. We just didn't do that. Did we? No.
No, I think people chose to go to more conservative theology. I think that's based. It's that. Don't you think?
Yeah, and we were in process. It was the time of the emergent church. Brian was one of the leaders of all of that, and he was writing about it, but we hadn't actually progressed to what he was writing about when he was there. And so, but when Matthew came in, he embraced that, and we moved forward with some things that we hadn't done before, and some people didn't want to do that, and they liked the more traditional, evangelical church atmosphere. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, we had a big evangelical church just up the road, and they went there, and I'm so happy that was there for them. I mean, we're Facebook friends with still a lot of these people that we knew for years back then. And but I'm so happy that they had a place to go, because if they didn't have a place to go, they might have stayed and given us trouble. So
it works out. It works out best for all. Yeah. Ideally, I consider myself that I'm pretty open minded. I think I've always been quite open minded, and I've noticed an evolution as my life has gone by. As I think back on moments where I was chewing on a thought or chewing on things that were maybe seemed like it were a little bit too much, but eventually I came out to the other side. Do you guys consider yourselves that you guys have been intrinsically always very open? Like that not as a disclaimer of like of not like as an arrogant disclaimer, but as a humble admittance that I think I think we handle change quite well. Do you guys recognize each other as that? I don't know. Maybe you guys can think about your parenting and how that has been for you. I think that's a good maybe perhaps scenario to imagine that that question in. How has it been? Like how much has your kids challenged you? At least that's been an experience with me and my folks. But but do you guys consider that you guys are intrinsically quite open and you handle change rather well? Like
I think so.
We do. Yeah.
I think yeah.
Yeah, that's one of our values. Oh, the second value. That's one of the enduring values, that we have always been a welcoming place. The second one is just kind of humorous, and it is we have a really hard time starting everything on time. It's always been late. I don't know why that is, but
you guys will be great in Puerto Rico then.
Yeah. And I think those are the same values that we have as a family and as a couple, that we are very accepting of people, and anybody's welcome in our home.
Yeah.
And, we have felt that same kind of welcome from other people as well.
I want to mention in the early days of our church, when we were in leadership of that church back in the early 80s, mid 80s, there was quite a number, well, not quite a number, I don't know, 4 or 5 different couples that were interethnic couples that came to our church, and couples who had adopted children that were from other countries or from other places, and our children were growing up with them. We have some very dear friends, actually the friends we were staying with in Houston, and they had.
I'll tell that part. Okay, so
she knows it better than me. She does.
So these dear friends of ours, they adopted 2 children. One was from Korea. They're the white couple, both of them. And one child was from Korea, and the other one was half black, half white. And so these little girls were best friends with our boys growing up. And one day we were reading a book about adoption, and I said, "Well, do you know anybody who's adopted?"
How old were they then?
They're like 4 and 6, 6 and 7, something like that. And they said no. And I said, "Well, what about Nikki and Stephanie?" And they're like, "What about them?" They had no clue that 2 of them, sisters, didn't look like each other, and certainly didn't look like their parents. And so I just think that was a beautiful story.
Yes.
And even with us, that our boys are, have more my complexion than Bill's. They look like Bill, but they have more my complexion. So I think they thought that kids came out like puppies. It's like any color didn't matter. Yeah.
That is a great story.
And I think that's wonderful. I think that speaks into the importance of why, man, why it's so important to be childlike, to rescue that childlikeness that throughout life, it's like that luster just keeps on fading away, fading out, and that. What has it been like? As we start kind of landing this fun conversation. What has it been like to be parents? Like what lessons, what pedagogical value, what education, how has that been your classroom for you both? Having kids, and then a sub question: having grandkids. What kind of lessons has that brought on to your journey?
Well, I think some of the things is that Bill's parents' way of parenting him is very different than what we did with our children, because Bill's father was a very absent kind of father. He was
there, but he wasn't
there,
involved.
But not involved. Yes. And so
Very much.
we tried to do things very differently with our boys, and to be involved with them, and to try to do things as a family. And so that was very different. The other thing that was different is when kids get to be teenagers, sometimes you can have these difficulties. And So what Bill, his wisdom was that he did not want to have a situation where the fights got escalated and got out of hand to the point that we're going to have to go and have therapy for 10 years before we can have a relationship. And so that was a value that we had, that we wanted to, stop the escalating of anger and difficulty so that we could have a good relationship with our kids. And so, and then we have 4 beautiful grandsons that I wish I could see more, really. Yeah. During this time, it's very difficult because at least we have technology, but I miss them terribly.
And it's really too bad that they're actually growing up.
I know.
They were really,
Yeah, kind of like missing out on these moments.
They have to grow up, but I miss the young grandkids.
Yeah. It's like reliving.
New ways to relate now.
So what would you say is the difference? I mean, other than the obvious that you're not directly raising the grandkids, what would be the difference between? And also, I'm intrigued. What is the sensation of seeing kids have kids? What is that? What is that like? I mean, it's kind of like a bit of a. I just came up with that question. I'm just intrigued. I mean, I have no kids of my own. I have niece and a nephew, but what is it like to see your kids grow up and now have families of their own? Like, what is that?
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Fortunately, it doesn't happen all at once. It's a very gradual process.
Right.
So get used to it as it comes along. And I know that I did a better job being a dad than my dad was to me. And one of the reasons why I would stop these conversations when it got too out of hand was because I remember my father would lose his temper, and I would be left thinking, he's the adult in the room. Why doesn't he manage this better? So when it came my time to be the adult, I tried to do a better job, and that worked out. That worked out better than a lot of the other things I tried. But they each do their parenting differently than I parented them, and I kind of feel like I did better than my dad, and they're doing better than me, and that's great. I think that's really great, and they are really, really all really fine boys and doing a great job growing up. The oldest now is 15, and the 2 youngest ones are both 13. Well, over a 3-year period, there, our daughters-in-law were just having babies,
pregnant at the same time, both times.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So
I'll tell you one more thing though. When I was there when my first son was born, I was in the delivery room there, and he comes out, and I told the story. I hope I don't cry telling it, because I felt like something descended on me, that it was just this feeling of love for this little infant, this newborn baby, that I just could never imagine would be like that. But boy, it just struck me as, wow, got new life here. This is my son. It was just an amazing moment. I'll stop there so I don't.
I have a question, and I think this might be the last question. Not to leave the mystery, but I think this would be a good way to close. Being together for such a long time, in contrast, I say that in contrast, with how relationships are defined nowadays, with how short-lived many relationships are. What would you, each of you, I want you guys to both give me an answer, has been a key element or a learning curve with not only cohabiting together, not only being physically together, but being in a relationship together for this amount of time? And maybe, I don't know if you guys have ever helped or counseled other couples, or if you ever ventured into that, maybe not willingly, but people come to you for that. I don't know if you have, that you can voice out your experience of what might have been a helpful thing for you to be in a relationship together that has maybe been a helpful thing to others that you have imparted as wisdom and as life lessons? So it's kind of like I'm asking like a cliche question, like what is the ingredient, what is the key, what is the formula? But I don't want to limit it to that. Of but like the essence of being together and really being together.
I don't think there's a formula. I think that two things. First, when um, we've always been in love. We've had our ups and downs, like everybody does, but we've always been and still are in love. And we've always been committed, which I think helps staying in love because it sort of forces you, if you're really committed and you find that you've got some issues, it forces you to work through those issues rather than let those issues tear you apart. And we've each had our issues. And I am so much a better person because, unfortunately, one of the things that I did inherit from my father was his whole patriarchal approach to things. And that and Shobha has really set me straight on a lot of that stuff over the years. And so, again, it's just been my pleasure to be married to Shobha all of this time and have her work with me. And I would have to say, I hope I worked a little bit, but helpful. But what else? What do you want to say? Yeah.
Well, I do think that the whole commitment part is very important because when, every couple has issues that you go through, but it was never to the point that we said, all right, this is it. We're not going to do this anymore. We knew that we were committed to each other, and whatever the issue was, we were going to do our best to work it out. And we got help from outside help. And we also have, you asked if we had counseled other couples. We have been marriage mentors to couples that are looking to get married at our church. And so there's some very dear couples that we went through a series of questions with, and we're still very close with all of them. And so
you got to perform a couple weddings.
Yeah, we got to do some weddings.
Few weddings over the years.
Are there some commonalities that you find in couples nowadays of things that you notice that are kind of like trending that maybe are things that they overlook in entering into a relationship, or little oopses that are maybe wrongly perceived of what relationships are in their perception? Are there, in that experience of being with couples, have you observed maybe those perhaps misguided conceptions of what relationships are?
Actually, I think couples nowadays have a much better idea of what it is to be a couple and what it is to be married and relational things than we ever did. I mean, our marriage the counseling that we got was basically, we went over a bunch of verses in the Bible about married couples. It had nothing to do with how do we manage
real life situations
together. Yes, we never got any of that. We had to learn all that on our own. Whereas I think nowadays, at least the couples that we have been with and talked with and done the marriage mentoring with, they're way ahead of where we were.
Exactly.
When we were getting married.
Yeah.
And we actually also had the privilege of helping two guy friends of ours.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
That was so, we were very honored that they asked us, and we didn't know what we were doing, but
we all did research and ideas, and we put together some.
Any particular lessons learned there, like generally of that, like that you came out better people, but
They were people, and
Yeah.
and they were in love, same as we were in love, and and they were savvy about their relationship, and we talked things through with them. I don't know how much we actually helped them per se, because they were doing pretty well, and they're doing great now.
They even have a little boy
They got
now.
a boy, yeah.
No. I hope he doesn't forget us, because we're not meeting at church anymore.
Come up
And
to
he
us.
used to, when the beginning of church, he would come and sit on our lap for a little bit at the beginning of church. So we hear that he still remembers us, but
We hope so.
I can't wait to see him again.
Might be foreign.
those are the sad stories about the quarantine. You know, losing that touch and that contact.
I don't know what it is, but we have been able to relate to people much younger than ourselves. And we're both retired now. We're getting older. And when I was young, I never thought anybody my age would have anything to say to me. And we have a lot of friends in their 30s and 40s and even 20s still, probably, that we're friends with, and we relate to, and they relate to us. And I think that
very nice.
they value us and our experience and our presence, and we value them. And it amazes me a little bit, but I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, and I think that, just giving my 2 cents here, I think that speaks about you guys, and I think that speaks about those relating with you. It's like, when I met you guys at the Wild Goose, and say again.
Very first Wild Goose.
It was my first Wild Goose.
It was the very first one.
Was it the first one or
It was
the
the second one. The second one,
Okay.
because my spirit was there in the first one, but my physical body wasn't there. Because I knew about it and I really wanted to do, but I couldn't make it all happen. But when I met you, that thinking about where I was there almost a decade ago, 8 years ago, I met this couple, and here where we still keep in touch. And I think it's obviously a commentary on both parts, because there's intentionality, there is the intersectionality of where we find ourselves in life, and I would like to say, in that beautiful sphere of questions, and that beautiful sphere of embracing the mystery, embracing the unknown. Wherever that might be. I mean, I was there, quote unquote, identifying myself as a Christian. Now I don't, but I don't think I have changed all that much. I mean, I think a lot of it is a lot of semantics, and they can be great conversation pieces. But as I've grown older, I've realized that, people I talk to me, they're like, well, you sound very Christian. I'm like, oh, that's fine. I mean, if that's why you can see me. I'm like, it's fine. I'm not hung up on it or not. I think the essence is what really brings us together. And when I think about you guys, I think of my conception is of wisdom, of life lived, and the little I know about you guys is an attempt of being genuine, an attempt of trying to progressively be as genuine as you can be. And I think that's a whole lot of what the world needs, of cutting our BS, which sometimes is an acquired piece of defense, and sometimes it's just being right down arrogance, but just being right down honest will bring us to a place where we are engaging. A 20-year-old can engage with a 60-year-old, a 70-year-old, an 80-year-old, because there is that willingness and also the recognition of, like, yes, there's things that I just can't do anymore that maybe you can do, and there's things that you guys can definitely fill me in on that I'm not there. And I think that mutual dialogue, unending dialogue, would make a different climate. Speaking about this country, in this country, definitely.
What a compliment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So thank you guys. I've really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this dialogue. I've always enjoyed any sort of interaction I have with you guys. I hope
Nice.
the next episode will be not through this virtual.
That's really nice.
Get in touch sometime. We'll do this without an audience.
See that definitely catch up behind the scenes, and just thank you again. Hopefully our encounter will be physical encounter. I'm dying to have physical encounters with many people, and you guys are definitely one of those people I would love to catch up with, hopefully in your sector, hopefully in your zone.
Yeah. Thank you,
Okay.
Angel.
So people, gracias. Thank you everyone who tuned in. I really appreciate it. I always like closing in with these words of Walter Mercado, who is actually on Netflix. This is a documentary about this. He's a Puerto Rican astrologer. Astrologo? I don't know how to say it in English. But he was quite particular. And there's a documentary called Mucho, Mucho Amor on Netflix. I really recommend it. And he always closed his segments by saying, les deseo mucha paz y mucho amor. I desire and I wish you all a lot of peace and a lot of love. So people, see you all later on next episode.
Gracias.
Adios.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you, man.